The Pirate Republic that terrified three empires. The true story of Nassau's lawless kingdom. What if I told you that pirates once established their own democratic republic in the Caribbean, with elected leaders, written laws, and a navy that defeated the British Empire? And it was so successful that three European powers had to unite just to destroy it? Between 1706 and 1718, the Bahamas island of New Providence became home to one of history's most audacious experiments in radical democracy, a pirate republic that governed itself, rejected all European authority, and grew so powerful that it threatened the entire Atlantic trade system. At its peak, over 1,000 pirates lived in Nassau, outnumbering civilians 10-1, while their fleet of dozens of ships terrorized merchant vessels from the Carolinas to the Spanish Main. This is the true story of the Pirates Republic of Nassau, a democratic society built by outcasts, maintained by violence, and ultimately destroyed by the empires it challenged. And incredibly, most of what we think we know about it is wrong. The birth of pirate paradise. In 1706, a combined French and Spanish force attacked Nassau, the capital of New Providence Island in the Bahamas. They burned the town, drove out the British governor, and left the island in ruins. Britain, exhausted from the War of Spanish Succession, decided Nassau wasn't worth defending or rebuilding. They simply abandoned it. For most places, this would have been a disaster. For pirates, it was an opportunity. The Bahamas occupied a perfect strategic position, close to major shipping lanes, surrounded by shallow waters that large warships couldn't navigate, and now conveniently lacking any government authority. Within months of the British abandonment, pirates began arriving. First came a few dozen, then hundreds, then over 1,000. They weren't the romantic figures of later fiction. They were former sailors, escaped slaves, deserters from various navies, indentured servants who'd fled their masters, and men fleeing debt, crime, or persecution. Many were veterans of the War of Spanish Succession who found themselves unemployed when peace broke out, their only skill being maritime warfare. By 1715, Nassau had transformed from a burned-out colonial backwater into a thriving pirate haven. The harbor bristled with captured ships. Makeshift taverns and brothels lined the waterfront. And most remarkably, the pirates established something unprecedented, a functioning democratic society, the Pirate Constitution. Here's what Hollywood gets wrong about pirates. They weren't anarchic chaos agents. They were in many ways more democratic and egalitarian than any legitimate government of their time. The pirates of Nassau operated under what they called the Articles, written agreements that every crew member signed before joining a ship. These articles weren't mere guidelines. They were binding legal contracts that anticipated modern labor law by 2 centuries. A typical pirate article included democratic leadership. Captains were elected by majority vote and could be removed by the same process. Unlike naval vessels where captains held absolute authority, pirate captains commanded only during battle or chase. In all other matters, the crew voted. Equal pay, almost. Plunder was divided according to fixed shares. A common distribution gave the captain 1.5 or 2 shares, skilled crew, surgeons, carpenters, quartermasters, 1.25 shares, and ordinary pirates 1 share each. Compare this to merchant or naval vessels, where captains might earn 100 times what common sailors received. Disability insurance. Pirates who lost limbs or eyes in battle received compensation from the common fund, 600 pieces of 8 for a right arm, 500 for a left arm, 100 for an eye. This was genuine social insurance, created 200 years before workers' compensation laws. No discrimination. Many pirate crews included escaped slaves who received equal shares and voting rights. Some became captains. While not universal, this racial integration was revolutionary for the 1710s. Behavioral rules, articles banned fighting among crew members, required lights out at 8 p.m., prohibited women and boys on board to prevent sexual jealousy, and mandated that disputes be settled ashore by sword or pistol duel. This wasn't theoretical. These rules were enforced. The pirate Edward England was deposed and marooned by his crew for showing excessive mercy to prisoners. Charles Vane was voted out as captain for cowardice and replaced by Calico Jack Rackham. In Nassau, this ship-level democracy scaled up to govern an entire town. The pirates elected a magistrate, though the title was mostly ironic, and a council to manage common affairs. They established rules for dividing captured goods, settling disputes between crews, and coordinating defense against potential attacks. The Flying Gang. By 1716, Nassau's pirate community had coalesced into what they called the Flying Gang, a loose confederation of pirate crews that cooperated for mutual benefit while maintaining individual ship autonomy. The most famous members included Benjamin Hornigold. A former British privateer who turned pirate, Hornigold was one of Nassau's founders and its de facto leader in the early years. He mentored several younger pirates who would become legendary. Edward Teach, Blackbeard, Hornigold's protege, who would become history's most famous pirate. Blackbeard cultivated a terrifying image. He wove slow-burning fuses into his enormous black beard and lit them during battle, surrounding his face with smoke. He captured over 40 ships and blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina. Charles Vane. Vicious and uncompromising, Vane refused any offer of pardon and attacked ships regardless of nationality. His brutality was extreme, even by pirate standards. Calico Jack Rackham. Named for the colorful calico clothes he wore, Rackham was more notable for his crew members than his captures. And Bonny and Mary Read, two of history's few documented female pirates who fought as fiercely as any man. Samuel Bellamy, called Black Sam, he captained the Whydah, a former slave ship that became one of the most powerful pirate vessels. Bellamy was unusual for his eloquence. He once delivered a speech to a captured captain about how pirates were Robin Hoods of the sea, fighting against merchant tyranny. Together, the Flying Gang controlled dozens of ships and over 1,000 armed men. They didn't just raid individual merchants, they effectively shut down entire trade routes. Ships refused to sail through Caribbean waters without naval escorts. Insurance rates skyrocketed. The economic damage reached into millions of pounds, billions in today's money. The Republic's golden age, between 1716 and 1718, Nassau flourished as a genuine alternative society. Contemporary accounts describe a chaotic but functioning community where former slaves, Europeans, and indigenous people lived side by side, where captains waited tables in taverns, where wealth was distributed more equally than anywhere in the Atlantic world. The pirates established their own economy. Captured goods were sold at Nassau's market. Merchant ships from American colonies, whose governors often turned a blind eye, arrived to buy plundered merchandise at discount prices. Everyone benefited except the original owners and their insurers. They even created their own entertainment industry. Nassau had numerous taverns with colorful names like the Bucket of Blood and the Three Crowns. Music, gambling, and drinking were constant. One observer noted that at any hour of day or night, one could find 100 men drunk in Nassau's streets. But Nassau wasn't just hedonistic chaos. It was also a military power. When Spanish forces attempted to retake the island in 1716, the pirates organized a surprisingly effective defense. They mounted cannons from captured ships on the fort ruins, posted lookouts, and coordinated their vessels to patrol the approaches. The Spanish, expecting disorganized rabble, encountered organized resistance and withdrew. This military success revealed something that terrified European authorities. Pirates could organize, could govern, and could defend territory. They weren't just criminals. They were a rival political entity. The intelligence network, one of Nassau's most overlooked aspects, was its sophisticated intelligence network. Pirates maintained contacts in Charleston, Boston, New York, and various Caribbean ports. Sympathetic merchants, corrupt officials, and tavern keepers fed them information about ship movements, cargo manifests, and naval deployments. This intelligence was so good that pirates often knew a ship's exact cargo, route, and defenses before attacking. They could position themselves perfectly, intercept vessels where naval protection was weakest, and avoid British or Spanish warships that might challenge them. The network also provided early warning of threats to Nassau itself. When the British finally organized an expedition to retake the island in 1718, pirates knew about it months in advance. Enough time to prepare, though not enough to prevent what would come. The empires strike back. By 1717, the situation had become intolerable for Britain, Spain, and France. The pirates weren't just a nuisance, they threatened the entire colonial system. If Nassau could exist as an independent entity, what else might unravel? If sailors could desert to piracy and find freedom, democracy, and better pay, who would crew the merchant and naval vessels that sustained empires? The ideological threat was as dangerous as the economic one. Nassau proved that common men could govern themselves without kings, that multiracial societies could function, that democracy could work. These were revolutionary ideas in 1717, ideas that would eventually spawn revolutions, but in 1717 were simply dangerous. Britain took the lead in eliminating Nassau. They appointed Woodes Rogers, himself a former privateer, as governor with a mandate to restore order by any means necessary. Rogers was given a small naval force, 100 soldiers, and 2 powerful tools: a royal pardon for any pirate who surrendered and authorization to hang anyone who didn't. Rogers arrived at Nassau in July 1718 with a simple message: submit or die, the end of the Republic. The arrival of Woodes Rogers fractured the pirate community. Some, like Benjamin Hornigold, ironically, accepted the pardon and even joined Rogers's forces to hunt former comrades. Others, like Charles Vane, fired on Rogers's ships and fled Nassau, rather than surrender. Blackbeard had already left months earlier, establishing himself in North Carolina, where he'd bribed the governor for protection. Calico Jack Rackham accepted the pardon initially, but soon returned to piracy. The flying gang splintered into factions, some choosing submission, others choosing continued resistance. Rogers moved quickly to dismantle the pirate infrastructure. He demolished the fortifications pirates had built, hanged several unrepentant pirates as examples, and established a real government with courts, laws, and consequences. He also brought settlers to outnumber the remaining pirates and rebuild Nassau as a legitimate colony. The military campaign against holdouts was brutal and methodical. British warships hunted down pirate vessels one by one. Blackbeard was killed in a ferocious battle off North Carolina in November 1718. His head cut off and hung from a ship's bowsprit. Charles Vane was captured, tried, and hanged in 1720. Calico Jack Rackham was captured along with Anne Bonny and Mary Red. Rackham was hanged while the women, both pregnant, were imprisoned. By 1720, the Pirates Republic of Nassau was finished. The flying gang was destroyed, its members dead, imprisoned, or scattered. Nassau had returned to British control and would remain so for over 250 years. What they really achieved, the Pirates Republic, lasted barely 12 years, but its legacy is profound and largely unrecognized. Democratic governance. Nassau pirates practiced democracy decades before it became acceptable political theory. Their elected captains, written constitutions, and majority-rule decision-making anticipated later democratic movements. Racial integration. While not perfect, pirate crews included free black men with equal voting rights and equal pay, something that wouldn't become law in America for 250 years. Social welfare, disability compensation, injury insurance, and equitable profit sharing made pirate crews the most progressive employers of their era. Challenge to empire. Nassau proved that common people could organize, govern, and resist imperial power. While ultimately crushed, it demonstrated that alternatives to monarchical rule existed. Historians debate whether pirates were proto-revolutionaries or just criminals seeking profit. The truth is probably both. They wanted wealth, certainly, but they also created a society fundamentally different from and more equitable than the world they'd fled. The myths we inherited modern pirate mythology, the treasure maps, walking the plank, X marks the spot, mostly comes from 19th century novels like Treasure Island, not historical reality. Real pirates rarely buried treasure. Why bury wealth you might never retrieve? Walking the plank was virtually never practiced, and most pirates died poor. But we also inherited a more insidious myth, that pirates were merely criminals, chaotic villains without ideology or organization. This myth was propagated by the empires that destroyed them for obvious reasons. Admitting that pirates had legitimate grievances, democratic governance, and functional societies would have undermined the justification for crushing them. The truth is more complex and more interesting. Pirates were criminals. They murdered, robbed, and terrorized. But they were also social revolutionaries who created one of history's most radical experiments in egalitarian democracy, only to see it destroyed by the empires they'd rejected. Why it matters today. The Pirates Republic of Nassau raises uncomfortable questions that remain relevant. When is rebellion justified? The pirates were fighting a system that impressed sailors into brutal service, maintained slavery, and reserved wealth and power for aristocratic elites. Were they criminals or freedom fighters? Can democracy work without state power? Nassau functioned democratically for years without police, standing armies, or bureaucracies. It ultimately failed, but it worked longer than many thought possible. What is legitimate authority? Nassau's pirates rejected royal authority as illegitimate. Britain declared them criminals. Who was right? History is written by winners, but that doesn't mean winners are always right. Freedom versus order. Nassau offered freedom but little security or stability. Britain offered order, but at the cost of individual liberty. This tension remains unresolved in modern politics. Conclusion: the republic that couldn't last, the Pirates Republic of Nassau, was doomed from the start. It was too small, too isolated, too threatening to too many powerful interests. It survived as long as it did only because empires were temporarily distracted by European wars. But for 12 remarkable years, 1,000 pirates created something unprecedented, a multiracial democratic society governed by elected leaders and written laws, where the poorest sailor had as much say as the captain, where disabled veterans received compensation, and where escaped slaves could live as free men. They built it through violence and maintained it through theft. They terrorized innocent merchants and murdered prisoners. They were neither pure heroes nor simple villains. They were desperate men who rejected the injustices of their world and tried to build something better, even if their methods were brutal. When Woodes Rogers arrived to end the Republic, he reportedly found a flag flying over Nassau's fort. It showed a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear piercing a heart in the other. Beneath it were the words, Adeo a Libertate, from God and liberty. It was a fitting epitaph for a society that had briefly shown an alternative way of living before being crushed by the empires whose authority it had dared to reject. The pirates are gone. Nassau is a tourist destination, and the Republic is forgotten. But the questions it raised about freedom, justice, democracy, and legitimate authority remain unanswered, waiting for each generation to struggle with them anew.